I want to go and get.
Hi, Hannah. Hannah's mom. Dad. Hi. Okay, we'll start in just about 3 minutes. We'll wait for some others. There's supposed to be 6 parents, so just give them a couple minutes to come in. Okay. Hi, Harry. Is Harry your child's name or your name? Sorry, I know it's very confusing now because some of you are signed in with your kids' accounts, and then I'm not sure whether it's your name or your kid's name. Okay, anyway, it's 5, so I think I'm going to start. I'm not going to wait too long. Harry's okay. Hello, parents of Harry. Okay, so this is what we're going to do today. I'm not going to wait too long because for our lessons, we don't want to start late because we feel that starting late or accommodating latecomers, basically it's not fair to people who come early. Okay, so we want to make sure that we start on time so that our kids can end on time. We don't want to delay for too long. Also because our classes are all recorded as we go along. So kids who come in late can always go back and replay the beginning if they lose out. Okay, so we're just going to start. I'm going to turn off all your mics. I'm so sorry about that, but usually because there is feedback between my mic and if you're using laptops and all that, so I'm going to turn off the mics. I will leave the chat box open for you guys to talk. If there's anything you need to say or anything you want to ask, you can type into the chat box. If you have any urgent question to ask, you can always tap on the hand button. You should be able to see there is a hand button here. Okay, so you can tap on the hand button and that would virtually raise your hand. So it will ding and then I will know that you need to say something. Okay, so if at any time you have something to say, you can always click on the hand button or you can type into the chat box. All right, so without further ado, I'm just going to get started so that we can end on time. Today, basically what I want to do with all of you is to go through some tips for preparing for PSLE English. I am assuming that you all have kids who are primary 6 or maybe primary 5. Okay, so right now, I think from now to 1st October, it's about 150 days, maybe around there. So it's 150 days to PSLE English. It sounds scary, right? Okay, especially now that we're all stuck at home, or not stuck at home, safe at home during this HBL isolation period. Time passes very quickly in the sense that when we come back to school, when we come back to school, it's already going to be that term 3 for them. And then very quickly gets to term 4 and then it will be PSLE period. Okay, so we want to make sure that you guys and your kids are on track to preparing for PSLE. Make sure that they have tools. We want to give them tools in their arsenal or weapons in their arsenal to kind of make sure that they can tackle the PSLE easily. All right, so if you were able to view the task earlier, I actually released a question, we call it a pre-lesson task or assignment, okay, where students can actually answer questions. Usually we give them questions that have to do with the upcoming lesson. So I see that Hannah's mom has given me some questions, which I will tackle at the end of the workshop. Okay, so right now let's just get into the workshop proper. Okay, hope my face is not too big. Very alarming. Okay, so today, in case you are not quite sure, you have not used this platform before, this is our Class In app. Okay, there is a class notes function on your right side of your screen, on that side. Basically, you can take screenshots at any point during the lesson if there's something important that you want to take note of. All these screenshots are actually saved inside the app. So if you want to make sure that it's really easily saved for yourself, you can also use your own print screen function to take screenshots. If you're on an iPad, you can just press the buttons to take screenshots. There's also the chat box, which you should have seen by now. It's the speech bubble icon. So in that chat box, you can just respond to me at any time. I may ask you guys to buzz in the chat box in response to a question. There's also a virtual hand, which I mentioned just now. You can raise your hand to ask or answer questions. Okay, so that's just our app. Okay, so today is English. We're going to talk about English, and these 3 things here, empathetic communicators, discerning readers, and creative inquirers, these are actually all part of the MOE syllabus. I didn't come up with them. I wish I did. It's a very concise summary of what we want them to learn in primary school. But basically, we want them to be able to achieve these goals at the end of PSLE So this is something that we also strive to work towards as TCHER teachers. Okay, so I wanted to show you very quickly just the basic format of the paper. I think this is something that most of you should be familiar with by now. Just to run through really quickly, paper 1 is their sit writing, which is usually an email or a letter or a report. The reason why it's called situational writing is that we want them to respond to a situation. So they'll be given a comic or a cartoon. They have to respond to the situation. They have to know whether they're supposed to write, for example, a letter of complaint or a letter of compliment, a proposal to propose something. All right, so those are situational writing. It is basically MOE's way of trying to make writing functional. We really want them to be able to write, to pick up skills that will be useful in real life. We want them to be able to translate these skills into real life, because I'm sure none of you, or very few of us, write compositions or write narratives for work, right? But all of us are writing emails, we write reports. So situational writing is MOE's way of trying to make our learning functional, writing functional. Continuous writing is our compo, which is worth 40 marks. Total for that paper is 27.5%. All right, paper 2, you've got your grammar, vocab close, visual text compre, and grammar close, which are all MCQ. I know grammar close, it says OE, but technically it is also an MCQ because they give you 15 options and you pick. So it's technically a multiple choice question as well. Editing, compre close, synthesis, and transformation, which are our true open-ended questions. You have to fill in the blanks. And comprehension, which is, again, I think one of parents' major bugbears. Lastly, we have our listening compre, which is coming up quite soon. Oral, which is also coming up quite soon. Okay, both of which are total 35% altogether. All right, so this is our basic English paper outline. Total 100%, total is 200 marks. So divide by 200%. All right, so just a question, maybe I throw it out to you guys. What is your what is the most concerning part of the English exam for you? So I've got answering device on screen. What I want you to do is to key in, if A, for example, situational writing is what you are most worried about, you can press A and submit. If you think that sit writing and compo, both of them are equally worrying to you, you can put A and B and submit. So it really doesn't matter. You can put in as many as you like. If you're concerned about the entire paper, you can go in and key in A to G. That's up to you. All right, but specifically, which part of the English exam is most concerning to you? Not to your children, to you as a parent. I know that for the last few weeks, as parents, we've been more involved in our kids' learning. Okay, so maybe you have also a clearer idea of what your children's deficits are, maybe the areas that need the most improvement. So go ahead and key in which of the ones are the most concerning to you. Hi, Ivy. Is that Ivy or Ivy's parent? I'm not quite sure. But hello, thank you for joining us. Right now, I just need you to key in what you think is the most concerning part of the English exam to you as a parent, trying to help your kids do well in the exam. Okay, so I've got, I think, 2 people responding. I will play a little bit of music for you as you think. Ivy, I think you're not able to answer because you came in a little bit too late. Once the answering device is released and then you come in, you cannot, we have to close it first. Okay, so just give us a minute, let the other parents answer. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, thanks. I've got all your answers in. So now you can see, I think 2 of you mentioned compo, 1 of you said close passages and editing, and 2 of you mentioned open-ended compre. Now, I know it says that correct answer, but there is no right or wrong answers. It's just that, as I predicted, most parents are most concerned about compo and compre. It's very typical, I think, because these 2 are the most open-ended in the sense that for compo, you have to come up with a brand new compo from scratch. For compre, it's 20 marks worth of questioning on one passage, and the questions can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So a lot of parents are worried mostly about compo and compre. Now, as I've mentioned there, compo and compre total percentage is 30% of English marks. Okay, but that's just 30%. So why are we so concerned about 30% when, we've got the other 70% to worry about? I think that justifiably, we are worried about these 2, but we don't want parents to forget that there is a whole other 70% worth of marks that the kids need to score for. And we find that because a lot of parents and a lot of students themselves put a lot of focus on this 30% compre and compo, they tend to neglect everything else. All right. So we don't want them to forget about this other 70%. Now, why is it so important? It's because when we do the English paper, and when we look at especially for paper 2, your MCQ questions, your closed passage questions, your synthesis and transformation, all these skills are then put together and tested in your compo because they need to be able to write a grammatical sentence. They need to be able to use interesting vocabulary. So all these skills that they practice in their paper 2 are then put into use in their compo paper. Okay, so in fact, a good way to practice for the compo paper is to do your paper 2. All right, and we also want to remind you that 90% of the English paper tests grammar, and that's basically the whole paper except listening complete. All right, for us, I think for us when we were in school, we did not learn grammar intrinsically, which means that there was no explicit teaching of grammar. Right now in school, they'll teach things like parts of speech. They teach us what a noun is, what an adjective is. They'll tell you what gerunds are. They'll tell you what past participles are. When we were in school, we never learned any of these. Okay, the focus for us when we were in school was basically to learn it more intrinsically, to kind of pick it up as we go along, to make it more instinctive in that sense. So sometimes for parents and for teachers of our generation, we find it difficult to connect with what our kids are learning in school because we never learn these terms. We never learn the explicit grammar. So for us, when we find it difficult, our children are learning a totally new syllabus based on the evolution of grammar and evolution of how we've learned to teach grammar. But that's okay. The thing is that a lot of us know instinctively what the grammar mistake is, but we don't know how to explain it to our kids. All right, I have this problem too, even as an English teacher. Sometimes I can just say, it's just like that. When you read a lot, you kind of pick it up instinctively. We kind of lose out on that ability to explain the exact way to use the grammar thing, the grammar rule. Also because English, as I always tell my kids, don't worry because English is a really messed up language. There are many exceptions to rules that you can't possibly memorize all of them. A lot of it is learning through picking up through reading. So there are a lot of exceptions that they have to memorize. Okay, but basically my point here is that we don't want the kids to focus too much on these two big C's, compo and compre. My reason for this is very simple. Nobody can score full marks for compo. Not nobody. They will tell you at PSLE that you can. It's very hard to score full marks for compo. I think most kids, even the best possible writer, may score 99%, 98% for compo. And not all our kids are the best writers. Okay, so we want to make sure that they don't lose out on all the easy to get marks in the grammar sections because those are really very important as well. All right. Okay, so today I think one approach that I want to take, and this approach which I really like to take with my kids as well, is that I want you to understand what the common mistakes the kids make are. Because these mistakes are really common. Every year PSLE Marcus Report comes out, similar things over and over again. So pre-warned is pre-warned, is forewarned is forearmed. We want to make sure that they know the mistakes that the previous cohorts have made so that they don't make the same mistakes. Okay, so some mistakes, for example, our kids don't know what to check for. So we always tell our kids, go and check your work. Go and check your work. Have you checked your work? Did you read? Did you look at your compo? Have you checked it? But we keep telling them, go and check. But then kids, okay, so they read through their whole compo or they read through their whole paper. They say, yeah, mommy, I checked. Daddy, I checked already. But they don't know exactly what they should be looking for. So for them, checking just means I go and read through. I've answered all the questions. Yeah, I've written a compo. I have checked. So they don't know what specifically to look for. Okay, a second thing is that a lot of students answer based on memory. And for me, this is a real pet peeve because this is a very careless error in that sense. It is avoidable. So what do I mean by based on memory? When they read their comprehension passage, for example, they go and write their answers into the answer page without referring back to the compre passage. So they think, okay, I have just read this passage, it's fresh in my mind. I remember exactly what happened. And so I'm just going to answer based on what I remember, and I'm not going to check back. The problem is that sometimes they change certain words, and they change the words to a faulty one, or sometimes they miss out something important and they don't check. Okay, so this is something that for me I feel is very avoidable. So we don't want them to make avoidable mistakes. Third thing, of course, is that they answer quickly without thinking. So like I said before, we answer basically based on instinct. And same for our kids, they answer very quickly. They don't think, or they miss out certain things, certain clues which are there, and they don't look at them. So for PSLE, a big idea that the setters have is distractors. They put in distractors to confuse the kids. They put in distractors to confuse especially those who answer quickly. They put in distractors for those who don't have that second thoughts, or they don't think deeper into the question. So these distractors are very good at picking out those errors very easily. And the last one, of course, is that the students don't quite know what the questions are asking for. So I can tell you, as a previous exam setter, not a PSLE setter, of course, but as exam setters in schools, there are certain ways to phrase comprehension questions, for example, where we want to elicit a certain kind of answer from the student. So if the kids don't know what my question stem is asking for, they may answer the wrong thing. If I ask them, for example, how is this done? They need to answer, it is done by something, something, something. So they need a reason or need a process, but they may answer something else. So they really need to know what the question stem is trying to get from them. Okay? So what do we need kids to work on especially? We really want them to aim for full or close to full marks for the MCQ segments. Why? Because MCQ, in that sense, 4 options, they pick one, they already have a 25% chance of getting it right, even if they don't know the answer. Okay, so we need to improve that percentage, right? If they already have a 25% chance of getting it correct, build on that. If they have, if their grammar is pretty decent, they should have at least a higher percentage, 75% chance of getting it right. So we want to make sure that for MCQ, they really need to get as many correct as possible. All right, we don't want to lose marks when the answer is given to you. You just have to figure out 1 or 4. All right, we also want to make sure that if they make errors in other parts of paper 2, the error should be because they really don't know the answer. It's also, as a marker, as a teacher, when the answer is, for example, the answer should be children, and then they put the answer as childs, for example. So this really gets my goat, because they know the answer. They know the answer should be the plural of child, but because they are careless, or because they don't spell it correctly. For example, if the answer is mischievous and they spelled it with an extra I inside, those really get me, because they know the answer. It's just a spelling that prevents them from getting the mark. All right, so this we really want to make sure that we cut down on careless errors based on spelling. We want to make sure that they know the answer and they cannot get that wrong. Okay, so what I want to do now is to look at an example compo. This is a composition that a student wrote. All right, so I want to give you just a little bit of time to read this compo, and I want you to kind of translate what we've been talking about into looking at this compo. So we talked about careless errors, we talked about spelling, we talked about grammar. When we look at a compo, or when we give model compos to our kids to read, are we sure that what we're giving them is really a model composition, or is it not? Okay, so without kind of building on that anymore, maybe I just give you a chance to look at this composition and tell me what you think. Is this an exemplary compo? Yes or no? Or if you're absolutely not sure, you can go ahead and press C. Okay, but we try to answer yes or no. Okay, so I'm going to give you just about 2 minutes, maybe a little bit less, to look at the composition. We play some music for you. If the volume is too loud, you can always adjust the volume at the slider here, volume slider here. Yep. It'll be just about a minute and a half more for the rest to answer. Okay, I'm just waiting for 2 more parents. If you're not sure, it's fine. You can always put C. All right, just about 20 seconds more. Okay, so since Ivy has left, she's attended this workshop before. Okay, so since she's left, I'm just going to go on with the compo. Okay, without telling you exactly, without releasing the answer to you first, let me just go through some of the things here. Okay, so this is actually a compo that's written by a student, and not just by a student, but by a student from a learning center. And then the learning center actually put this compo online to kind of say, look, our kids write great compositions. Okay, so somebody sent it to me and said, what do you think? And I kind of got a little bit alarmed when I read the composition, because this is not really what I would say is an exemplary compo. It's not what I would say is a model composition. So this isn't a bad compo. I mean, definitely we cannot say this is a terrible compo. It's not a terrible composition, but I wouldn't use it as a model composition because there are many basic errors made in this composition that I cannot in good faith give to my other students to say, yes, you should emulate this composition. It is not a good compo to follow. All right, so I just want to pick out some things. Usually I give parents a chance to type. So if you do want to type in the chat box and tell me what you think is wrong with the compo, what you think can be improved in this compo, go ahead and tell me some things in the chat while I go through some of the rest. Okay, so one thing that I always bring up to my kids is sound effects. Sound effects are, I think, something that is taught very often in lower primary. So it's a thing that we want them to learn because it's very evocative, it's descriptive for lower primary students. But the problem is that a lot of our kids hang on to these lower primary techniques, even in upper primary. They don't kind of move on or graduate from the simpler ways of writing. So we don't want to use sound effects because sound effects are better expressed in words, in the verbs here. Okay, and it's also repetitive, right? Ring, ring, the school bell rang is very repetitive. It's kind of, especially when you read it aloud to yourself, it's very repetitive. Okay, I think, yes, definitely too many bombastic words. So bombastic is it's all a word that I like to use. So we see that words like aspired, words like vociferated, okay, these are not words that are really used in daily life in that sense. So if they are not used commonly, we find that they are usually used incorrectly or inappropriately in the compo. For example, vociferated is not something I would ever use as a vivid verb for help, help, she vociferated. It's very odd. It's not a typical use. Okay, so very few emotions, I think. Words here like opulent is misused. So you don't say that a family is opulent. You say that a family lives in an opulent house, right? The house itself is opulent. The sofa is opulent. Their decor is opulent. But the family itself cannot be described as opulent. The family is well-to-do, or the family is rich, the family is wealthy. There are errors like despise on, where on is redundant. You don't need a preposition there. We have words like, again, repeated words, the red van, and then screech, the red van screeched. Stalwart man, for example, where stalwart is a very positive word. Stalwart means loyal, supportive, steady. And then here, this student is using the word stalwart, a positive word, to describe two criminals who are trying to kidnap her. So it's very inappropriate. We get the sense that this child has basically memorized a whole bunch of vocabulary words and are just trying to stuff them in to make it look like she has a very broad vocabulary. So in this sense, what the marker would say is that, yes, I can see that this student knows a lot of words, but does she know how to use them accurately? Not quite. Okay, so that's one of the issues that we have. So this is a case of, I think, a lot of students think this is a model essay. When I give this to my students to read, all of them are going, oh wow, sure, this is such a great essay, this is so good, so many long words, so difficult. But I think when more practiced readers read it, you know that there's something a little bit wrong with it. It's not quite right. Okay, a lot of words are just shoehorned in without kind of thinking. It's not very thoughtful. It's not very accurate. Okay, so no, it is not an exemplary compo. So I think that one of the things we need to be careful of is what kinds of model compos do we give our kids to read? When we go to popular, for example, not now during the circuit breaker, but when we give our kids model compo books, a lot of the compos in these books are not really model compos. A lot of them are written by people who I think have a concept of what a model compo should be looking for, because they are trying to write to a rubric. They are trying to stuff as many words as possible in, but it doesn't flow well. It is not, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound nice. It doesn't sound like it's written by someone who is a fluent speaker of English. Okay, so what I would like to share with you is that one really good source of model compos for kids is actually your comprehension passage. PSLE compre passages are actually perfect model compos. They are short, they are very well written, there are no grammatical errors in there. They are written to according to a very fixed format. There is an introduction, there's a climax, there's a resolution at the end. Somebody learns something from the compo. So actually the best model compo is our PSLE comprehension passage. These are the kinds of short stories that we want our kids to emulate and to model. All right. You can also give them, I know Reader's Digest is like a thing of very like a very 1990s thing, but if you have any old copies of Reader's Digest, a lot of the shorter stories are also very good for the kids to read. Very good to model. They are short, they are simple, they are written because they are copy edited very thoroughly. So the passages and the stories in Reader's Digest are actually very good for kids to read. Short, simple, and very dramatic, usually. Okay, so I've gone through many of the errors in there, a lot of weird things, a lot of strange, unfluent things in there. Okay, so some other common errors basically for compo is that there is usually very poor story structure. Now, why is this a problem? The problem is that kids forget and parents forget that one of the things we test at PSLE is actually a time limit. So these kids go and practice writing. They practice writing really gorgeous, long, beautiful essays. They vet it and they edit and they write it over and over again and they kind of perfect it and they spend so long on it, but they forget that the actual PSLE compo only has to be written within 45 minutes. And 45 minutes includes reading the question, looking at the pictures, making your very short and simple story plan, and then starting to write. And all that within 45 minutes. So while you get your kids to practice writing compos, do make sure that they practice writing within that 45 minutes time limit. There is really no point at this point of time, if your kids are in primary 6, there is absolutely no point sitting down to write an essay over the course of a day or half a day. There's no point, because time limit, the time crunch is a really big part of the PSLE exam format. They have to write it in 45 minutes. So a big problem is that the kids start writing and they have grand plans for their compo and they want to write these long, complicated, beautiful things. And then they have written 2 or 3 or 4 really long, elaborate beginning paragraphs building up the story. And then they realize that, oh, I've got 15 minutes left. And then they rush to their climax, they rush to the ending, which is the most important part. So it becomes a very unbalanced essay. It becomes a very developed beginning and a very hasty ending, a very hasty middle. And we really want that middle part to be the most important part. So just like we tell them a story hamburger, where the bread is not so important, your meat is most important, the cheese, the meat, your lettuce, your sauces, that's the most important part. And then the bread at the bottom again. So the chunky part cannot be a giant lump of bread and then one very tiny patty and then another very thin piece of bread. All right, so usually this is because of time crunch. They are able writers, they are fantastic writers, but they simply cannot do it within 45 minutes. All right, a second error is that a lot of kids try to memorize or regurgitate stories from memory. Now, I see an advertisement on Facebook that pops up a lot in my feed because I'm one of the target audience, I guess, with my own kids. So I see that there's this advertisement that says, oh, you only have to memorize one storyline for PSLE and it will fit everything. Now, I'm really curious to know what this storyline is because you cannot possibly shoehorn anything to fit any sort of question. Now, if they mean that this memorized storyline is your basic introduction, climax, and then resolution, that's fine. That, of course, is your structure. It's not a storyline. But we find that students are desperate in the last month or the last 2 weeks. They start to memorize stories from scratch, or they look at a model compo and they memorize the whole model compo, and then they just pray really hard that the question that comes up for PSLE is going to be related or close enough that they can just throw out this composition again. Now, I find this is a real error, is a real mistake, because markers can always tell when something has been memorized and thrown back out. All right, it's very clear. And anytime students have done this and I call them out on it and they're like, oh, teacher, how do you know? It's very obvious. It's very obvious because the writing doesn't quite fit, the story doesn't quite fit. There are parts of it that are better memorized than others. So you have parts that are very detailed and other parts that are skipped through, and it tends to be the wrong part. We find that it doesn't flow, it doesn't sound like it's fluent from the student. There are parts that they memorize wrongly. Okay, so it just doesn't sound right. And every year the PSLE report, the markers say we really need kids to stop memorizing stories. It does not work. All right, the last thing, of course, like Hannah's mom has said, bombastic vocabulary that it fits awkwardly. Idiomatic errors means that they say things, for example, like instead of saying raining cats and dogs, they say cats and dogs were falling from the sky. Okay, so that's an idiomatic error where they kind of know what the idiom is, but they're not able to replicate the correct thing. So I've had before, for example, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And the student wrote about, I threw a stone and killed 2 birds. So they've got the idea, but in terms of idioms and proverbs, you can't change the sequence. You cannot add to it. You can't diminish it. You cannot expand it. It is what it is. So you can't change an idiom. You can't change a proverb. All right. So things like out of the blue, they say into the blue. I've gotten that before. I've also gotten what is it? Instead of saying all of a sudden, they say out of a sudden. Okay, so these are all idiomatic errors where they know the phrase, but they don't quite get it right. Okay, overused stock phrases. So using phrases like just now there was, I think, made a beeline for. Now these are all phrases that, again, we get the idea that kids have memorized a list, a vocabulary list, and they're trying to put them back in. Not a terrible thing if you have kids with really weak vocab, and this is, their way of coping, and this is the only way that they can get good vocabulary phrases in. Still okay. But we do want to make sure that if your kids are capable of better, that they don't fall back onto these very standard stock phrases, very, overused, memorized stock phrases, made a beeline for, raining cats and dogs. All these are, they're just overused. Okay, so what we want to remind parents and kids is that nobody is expecting you guys to be the next great Singapore novelist. We don't expect you to be a best-selling author. And I think it would be very unfair if PSLE was testing for this, because not all our students, out of 100,000 kids in Singapore, how can they only be giving A stars to those who are best-selling authors? We can't. So we really want to remind you that it's not about having that writing flair. I think a lot of parents, because they want to build on writing skills, they send their kids for creative writing courses, for example. And creative writing courses, while they are fantastic, they are enjoyable, it doesn't really address the bread and butter issue of writing, which for a lot of kids, they cannot write that very basic, logical, realistic storyline. So when they go for creative writing courses, they are encouraged to think out of the box, to think about interesting storylines, to think about twists. And then because they're so focused on all these extra decorative bits of their composition, that they forget the basic skeleton, which is very basically answer the question, write something logical, write something realistic. That's it. They're not expected to write something that is, special and interesting. Again, it's 45-minute essay. It's a 45-minute composition. We're not expecting fantastic, fabulous, well-developed, interesting stories that we can publish in a book. Not really, but we want them to answer the question. We want them to write logical, realistic storylines, which means very basically, could this happen to you? One example I like to give them is that I have kids who write things like they tripped and fell over and they broke every single bone in their body. Bones were sticking out at strange angles from their skin. Blood was puddling everywhere, which sounds very dramatic. But I ask my kids, if you fell over, would you really break every bone in your body? Is it really possible? Would it happen to you? No, it sounds exciting. It sounds dramatic. But if it wouldn't happen to you, then it's not realistic. Don't write it. Okay, so logical and realistic. We want them to write something grammatical, of course. We want them to show that they have a good grasp of vocab, and most importantly, we want them to finish the whole thing within 45 minutes. All right, so this is very basic, and I think the main failure here is that a lot of kids fail at this part. They stress out too much over writing an interesting story. It doesn't need to be that interesting. It just needs to be logical and realistic. Mainly, what we want them to test, what we are testing them on is answering the question, be grammatical, and this is icing on the cake. If they have lots of good vocabulary, that's great. If your kid is struggling, if your kid is someone whose English is not very good, then I would say forget about the vocab. That's the least of their worries. We want them to answer the question, which will lead to your realistic plots. We want them to be grammatical. Okay, so it's really about building blocks at this stage. If your child is not getting that basic storyline right, the good vocab is not going to help her or him. Make sure they get the story right first, answer the question, follow that kind of that story hamburger, get it to be balanced and realistic, make sure it's grammatical, and then they can think about making it better with good vocab. Okay? All right, so that's compo. All right, so how can we prepare them for exams? How can we make sure that they are studying correctly? When I was a primary 6 student, nobody ever taught me how to study. We were kind of just told, go and study for your exams. And then we just kind of sat down and looked at our 10-year series or looked at our textbooks and go, okay, I'm going to read the textbook from start to finish, and that's it, I've studied. But now with our kids definitely much more equipped with the internet, with better assessment books, with so much material online to look at, we really need to make sure that they know how to use the material. How do we study for the exams? So one thing that I want to remind parents about is that we don't want to stress our kids out too early. I think just like preparing for a marathon, if any of you are athletes or you like to run marathons, when we prepare for a marathon, we don't want to run a full 42-click marathon every single weekend. Every Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to go out and run 42 kilometers so that I will be prepared for a marathon that I'm going to take part in 6 months down the road. That's going to exhaust you. You're going to tear your ligaments, you're going to tear your ACL, whatever it is. You're going to be injured and you're not going to be in any shape to run that marathon 6 months later. Okay, so like any athlete, what you really want to do is to prepare, train in your basics, make sure you do your stretches, make sure you run. You start off with a 1 km run first, you start off with walking 1 km and then you run 2 km. Train your basics and then move upwards from there. So it is not really practical for kids, for example, to be doing exam papers, full exam papers every week. It doesn't really help them in that sense. So you want them to make sure that you're training them in the basics. If they have, for example, those assessment books that break down synthesis and transformation into all their different components, that's a good place to start. Okay, we want them to make sure that they know the grammar rules first, study all the grammar rules, get all the grammar rules right, tackle your MCQ next because MCQ is so easy, right? After MCQ, move on to your synthesis and transformation, move on to your grammar close. Conquer those closes. Try writing 2 paragraphs or 1 paragraph of a composition first. Don't write a full compo yet. Okay, so things like this, we want to make sure that it's really a scaffolded approach. Otherwise, I can guarantee you by like August, by September, our primary 6 kids are all just exhausted. They are brain dead. They have no energy left in them to get to the real exam. All right, so I think it's important for them to draw out, and this your kids can do, get them to draw out study plans. Because when they are invested in drawing out their own study plan, it's something that they have prepared for themselves, planned for themselves, they're more likely to stick to it. Okay, get them to draw a study plan. What are they going to tackle every week? By the time you reach maybe August or September, yes, you can start doing full papers, practice full papers within a certain time limit. Write a full compo within the time limit. But we really need them to practice the small things first. Instead of just writing the whole compo, write descriptive paragraphs, for example. Tell them, okay, this week we are just going to describe people. Go and write me 1 paragraph describing your grandfather. Go and write me 1 paragraph describing a character from a movie that you really can't stand. All right, so things like that. That's small baby steps. Okay, another way that kids can prepare, which I think is a very fun way to prepare for English, but that's me, is to get them to read. Okay, so definitely always get them to read. And it is important that when you get them to read, that reading is a thoughtful process. So it's not just about racking up as many books as possible. It's about, okay, reading a book, reading a story, and then going back to tell you, Mom, I thought this book was great because, and then get them to tell you what did they like about it, or what did they hate about it, which character was their favorite. Tell them to go and sit down with the book that they have just read. Go and write down all the interesting vocabulary phrases that they found. Write down interesting descriptions that they found in the book. Ask them to write it down themselves. Don't just look and highlight. That does nothing. Go and copy it down. Copy down that phrase. Ask them to put it into their own sentence again. All right. So after that, move on. Critical thinking. Ask them, what do you think the character could have done better? If you were to rewrite the ending, what would you do? So it's really about when you get them to read a short story or a book, what can you do to extend that book into a learning process, into a learning exercise? Also, it's important that they're reading age and level appropriate books. I'm sure you can all recognize these characters. This is what's his name? Geronimo Stilton. This is Dogman, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Captain Underpants. I think that a lot of our kids are stuck at the reading levels of primary 3, primary 4 kids. They don't really graduate. They are very stuck at reading simple things because they are afraid to commit to longer stories because they don't have time. So they read halfway and they're like, Mom, I cannot finish the book, so I don't want to read. Okay, I think that while if your child hates reading, then okay, by all means, whatever reading they're doing is fine. But do try to push them towards tougher things. Try to move them towards difficult stories. And again, more difficult stories does not mean longer. Short stories are fine. In fact, I would say at this point in the primary 6 year, if they don't like to read or they are stressed out about reading full novels, go and read just short stories. Because short stories are, again, what they're going to be reading in the compre passage is a short story. What are they going to be writing in compo? It's a short story. So we want them to be able to pick up these techniques of short story writing, short story reading, responding to short stories, because that's exactly what they'll be looking at in PSLE. Also, they cannot tell you that they cannot finish reading a short story. Read it within an hour, half an hour even. You can finish it really quickly. All right, so short stories are really, really valuable. So these are some resources. I think some parents were asking about resources that they can look at especially during this HBL period. Audible has now made their entire children's collection free for all students. So this is good because these are audiobooks. They don't have to have a paper, they don't have to have a hard copy. Audiobooks are great also because it trains their listening skills. A lot of our kids are not listeners. They would rather read. They look at visual things. They want to look at text. They don't want to listen. I'm someone like this. I find it very hard to listen to a podcast. My mind will start to wander. So audiobooks are great because it trains their listening compre skills. It makes them help them focus, as well as, I think this is a good selling point, parents, you can make your kids do their chores, go and fold laundry, go and sweep the floor while listening to an audiobook. Okay. Ebooks. So if you have an iPad or if you have a mobile phone for the kids to use, you can download the Libby Library app. I think a great deal of ebooks available. They can read on their apps. There's also Storyline Online. Why I like this is because it's divided by ages. So if you find that your child is a weaker reader, you can go to the grade 3 and 4, which is at primary 3, primary 4 level, which is fine. I think it's, again, we want to make sure that kids are doing what they're able to do. If you find that your kid needs a little bit of encouragement, it's okay to be reading something that's a little bit simpler, as long as it encourages them to start. Because I do find a lot of kids get stuck at, this is so difficult, the words are so small, the book is so long, so they don't want to start at all. So it's okay, baby steps, we want them to just get started. And the good thing about Storyline Online is that it comes with partner activities. So any book that they have there and is read by celebrities, including like Chris Hemsworth, Sean Astin. Okay, so there are activities after they've read the book, you can stretch it out for them. You don't have to think of an activity for them. All right, so just to sum up, some of the things you can do with your kids. Do try to go through their past mistakes. I think one major thing that kids do is that when we return exam papers, they look at the big red mark in the front and they don't bother looking at their mistakes. Okay, so it's important, I think, also as parents, don't focus too much on the grade. There's nothing we can do to change the grade once we get it. But what we can do is to look at the mistakes, find out what was the error, why did they make this mistake, so that we can address the mistakes and correct them. I find that from the start of like primary 4 to end of primary 6, kids are still making the same errors. They have not learned from their last mistakes. They have not learned from the previous papers. So when you look at their old exam papers, and it's really worthwhile, I think, in the preparation of PSLE, go and dig up their primary 5 mid-year paper, primary 5 exam, final exam. Go and dig up all their old papers, go and look at the mistakes that they have made, find out why they were wrong. Make them do it. Ask them to look at it. What is the mistake that you made there? Tell me why you got this wrong. How are we going to fix this in future? All right, drilling basics. How do we fix the basics? Like I said, attack the grammar rules first. And of course, lastly, to give your kids a list of things to check for. So at the beginning, I told you that kids don't know what to check for exam, right? So tell them what to check for. Say, okay, Hannah, go and look at your tenses only. All right, go and read through your whole compo. I want you only to look at tenses. Or you can tell them, I want you only to look at punctuation. That's it. Just check for that one thing. So one by one, check through the entire compo for these specific things. Of course, a good thing would be to look at their previous compos and see what the main error is, and then use that to tell them what they should check for. Okay, so they always make, for example, tense errors, or they always make plural errors because of plural, singular and plural. Ask them to check for these things. Okay, so ultimately, we really want our kids to just do their best. I think this is important to remind our kids. It's a fact of life that not all our students are A-star kids, not all our students are A kids, not all our kids are B or C or D kids. Okay, we really just want them to do their best to their ability. And I always tell my students, you do your best so that you can choose what school you go to. That is the most important thing. All right, that you do your best so that you don't feel stuck when it comes to, like, I've been pushed into this secondary school, not because I wanted it, but because my grades made me come here. So have a realistic choice of secondary school, know your limits, but also within your limit, you have to do your best. All right, we equip them with the tools. We are their lighthouses. We tell them we are the guide. We are the guide that tells them where the rocks are, where the water is. They are the ship. All we can do is to tell them, here are the rocks. Don't sail on the rocks. They have to decide for themselves where they're going to end up sailing. If they choose to disregard us and sail onto the rocks, then we cannot help them. This is really up to the kids themselves. So we want to make sure that they have the tools, they know what to check for, they know what to look for, they know things that they can do to prepare themselves. In the end, it's really up to them to figure this out. This is a very small step in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture of life. So PSLE is a very small step. We just want to make sure that they start stepping correctly. That's it. Okay, I want to look at some of the questions that you guys were giving me. I think Hannah's mom. You can type in questions in the question box if you have any. Let me just look at the ones that were given earlier. Okay, so Hannah's mom said how to prepare for oral, how to check compo. So check compo, I think I should have covered basically. How to prepare for oral. Oral, get them to read aloud to you. So this is another reason why audiobooks are good, because audiobooks give them a model of how people should be reading. It shows them how to modulate their tone. How do they sound interesting? How do they sound descriptive in their reading? They need to have a certain way of saying things. When they read a sentence, for example, they need to follow a certain rhythm. So audiobooks are really good because it gives them that model. It helps them to follow. In fact, I noticed that my own children, when they watch TV shows, I don't know if you all have noticed, when your kids watch a lot of American TV shows, and then when they are role-playing amongst themselves, suddenly their accents become very American. It's like their role-playing voice, especially for younger kids. So it's really important to give them model readers, so audiobooks for one. If you like to watch the news, get them to sit down and watch the news with you. Now it's very important that the kids know what's happening in the world. I think watching news is also good because one major failing I find that for kids for oral is that they don't know anything about the world. When you ask them to share their opinions, you ask them to give examples, they have no clue what's going on beyond their very small bubble of their own universe. So I think it's also important for parents to talk to your kids about things that happen in your work life, things that happen in the world. Talk about the virus, talk about, why certain government regulations are the way it is. Get them to talk back to you, to respond to you. Ask them what they think. A lot of times, I think kids are not really asked for their opinion, or when they ask for their opinion, they're told that their opinion is wrong. So Give them some leeway to talk to you, to discuss with you, to tell them what they think, and to get them to justify why they feel that way. Give them some really, some topic that resounds with them. Ask them to tell you, what do you think that kids should be allowed on TikTok, for example? Ask them, do you think that kids should be given their own mobile phones? Do you think that children should be made to wear school uniforms to school? All these things basically get them to start thinking, critical thinking, get them to start thinking about their own opinions. How do they feel? Are they able to justify how they feel? Then that's really important. For oral, usually also they are given real world stimulus. So the picture that they're given is like a cereal box, or it's a pamphlet or a brochure. So it's also good for them to look at all these authentic materials. We call them real world materials. Ask them to look at newspaper advertisements. Ask them why they think the newspaper advertisement is written in this way, or ask them, what do you think this newspaper advertisement is selling? When they watch YouTube videos, the YouTube video usually comes with an advertisement at the beginning. Ask them to tell you about that advertisement before they're allowed to watch YouTube. Tell them, okay, tell me what advertisement was showing, what product were they selling, who do you think they're aiming at, what's the target audience there. These are all things that they need to be able to discuss, because these are the questions that are asked in oral. Okay, so pre-close, I gave you this picture, which is a slide from one of our lessons actually. So these are the kinds of blanks that are given in pre-close. Word collocation basically are words that go together. So for example, we say go and make your bed. You don't say go and do your bed. We don't say go and tidy your bed, right? We say make your bed. So these are words that go together. So word collocations. So for pre-close, the blank could be make, for example. They say, the mother asked the child to blank her bed. So the student needs to know that it's make. All right, proverbs and idioms, I think you all should know what that means. Understanding in context. So for example, to blow out the blank on the birthday cake. So in context, they should know what goes on birthday cakes. It should be a candle. What do you blow out also? Candle. So these are understanding in context. Conjunctions, connectors, and prepositions are all your while, although, across, beyond, words that connect sentences, words that tell you where something is. Those are all connectors, conjunctions. Synonyms or antonyms, for example, they will say something like, John was miserable. He would never be blank again. So that blank would be happy. So it's the opposite. Because he was miserable, we know that he would never be happy again, or he would never smile again. All right, so these are all synonyms and antonyms. For pre-close, I think the major issue, the major problem that kids have is that they don't know how to identify whether the blank is a verb or a noun or a preposition or a conjunction. So they need to be able to read the sentence and kind of figure out the clues to tell them this is supposed to be a verb. I need an action to go in here. And if it's an action, what tense does it have to be in? If it's a noun, does it have to be singular or plural? If it's an adjective, what form should it be? Is it adjective or an adverb? So I think the one major problem is that I find when the kids are desperate and they don't really know what word goes in, the alternative word they put in is of a totally wrong word form. It's not the correct part of speech. For any mistake, for example, if the word is supposed to be a verb, so I need an action word. So it says, for example, the frog jumped, right? If they don't know the word jumped, they should be able to put in another word that is similar. That means that they need to know it's an action word that belongs in a blank. So if they don't know the word is jump, they don't know what on earth does a frog do, they should be able to at least write the frog walked or the frog sang, another action word. This would tell you that your kids are reading the passage correctly, that they're able to figure out that, yes, I need an action word in this blank, I just don't know what the action is. Okay, so that's really the first step. We wanted to make sure they know the part of speech. Is it a verb, a noun, an adjective, an adverb? What needs to go into that blank? Okay, so that's something they need to practice doing. If they don't know what is supposed to go into the blank, ask them to figure out first what kind of word is it supposed to be. Okay, what else? So compo, I think I should have more or less addressed that during the workshop as well. Is there anything else any other questions that you have? Anything else you want to know that I can enlighten you about? Sorry, I know it's a lot of talking. My mouth is dry. Let me drink some water while you kind of think of a question that you want to ask. Anything else, parents? Any difficulties that your kids have? Any particular mistakes? Some parents asked me before if I can recommend any assessment books. I'm sorry to say that there is no assessment book in the market that I can wholeheartedly recommend. Mostly because assessment books are not really written by MOE teachers or ex-PSLE markers, which I think is a major problem. In fact, you find that the PSLE past year papers that are released, the answer schemes that come with these books are not always accurate. So a lot of times, parents are marking your kids' assessment, their answers based on the answer scheme that is given. The answer scheme that is given in all the past year papers are not at all verified by SEAB or by MOE. Okay, it's written by assessment book writers. So I cannot say even that the answer schemes are always correct for past year papers. Any short stories the authors to recommend? Ooh, lots. What kinds of books does she like? Any genres that she prefers? Actually, there is a list of one easy to find, I think, online. Actually, Catherine Lim is quite easy for them to read. Catherine Lim, which I know is out. It's they're quite old fashioned in that sense. It is a very old. She's now quite an old author, but her stories, because they're in a local context, they're written in a local context. They are written so there's one less thing for them to understand. They are very short. They are very simple. One good story is Kevin by Catherine Lim. Is it easy to write out a point for compos? Very easy. They always do. Always, always, always. Compo, I think this is one of their major problems, that they start writing very excitedly and then they didn't plan or they didn't think where they're supposed to end up, and then by the end of their essay they are not answering the question at all. So it might be a fair enough story, but their story doesn't answer the question. So if the story is about, for example, an act of kindness, they start writing about an act of kindness, but it ends up somewhere about being considerate or about forgiveness or about a friendship, and it totally doesn't answer the question at all. So it's really important for your kids to take that 5 minutes before they start writing to plan their essay. And this is a lesson that we just did this week, the primary sixes, right, Hannah? Okay, about plot and about planning essays and about saying that you really, really need to take that 5 minutes. You won't fail, but you will be marked down. So, I mean, there is no point at which the PSLE marker will look at your essay and go, oh, this is a failing essay. No, everything is taken into consideration. So did you answer the question? Are you, a lot of it is how grammatical are you? Have you punctuated properly? Are your sentence structures varied and interesting? I would always say that your first step is always to get your grammar and punctuation right. Okay, your compo needs to be grammatical. It needs to answer the question. So just follow a very basic storyline. You don't have to write something that is too exciting. Please remind your kids, the more complicated their storyline is, the harder it is to write, the more work they're going to have to put in to resolve that storyline. It doesn't have to be exciting. It just has to answer the question. Okay, again, I think the easiest yardstick for them to apply is, would this happen to me? Would this happen to my friends? That's it, as simple as that. Please don't go and write a Channel 8 drama, which I think is one of the major things. They all want to make it very, very exciting and very interesting. But the rubric does not say the more interested I am in reading it, or the more fascinating your story is, the more marks you get. No, you just want them to answer the question, write a realistic story, be grammatical. That is your bread and butter, number one. Okay, so we don't want them to make any grammatical errors. After that, okay, that first level, the second level is you need to complicate or make your writing a little bit more interesting, in that sense, not the storyline, but your sentence structures. So longer sentences, complex sentences. It cannot always be, I had a dog. The dog's name was Bob. Bob drank some water. Bob went for a walk. So it's very easy to be grammatical when you write very simple sentences, but that doesn't tell the marker that your English is of a certain level, right? It tells you that you can write very short, very simple sentences. So it's not just about being grammatical after that. After being grammatical, you have to go to the second level, which is more complicated sentences, longer sentences, more interesting sentence structures. Okay, so after you've gotten that down, then we want to improve on vocab. Can they use more interesting vocab? Instead of saying, she was very happy, what other words for happy can they use? All right, so first level would be replace. Let me write this down, it's actually easier. Oh, I'm out of time. Okay, so your first level for vocabulary, for example, is that we want them to use basic. The first level is basic vocab. So to be able to use words like happy, she was happy, she smiled happily, she gave a happy, she did a happy little jump, or she did a happy little dance. That's very basic. Okay, second level is, can they switch one for one? So switching basic vocab for a more difficult word. For example, so instead of happy, she smiled ecstatically, she was thrilled, she was delighted. That's a one word swap. That is your second level. The third level is, can you change in a description? Switching words for descriptions. So instead of saying she was happy, instead of saying she was thrilled, say that a shiver of delight ran down her spine. That's a third level up, you see. So we want to make sure that they conquer one level by one level first. If they cannot get their basic vocab grammatically right, there's no point going on to the second level. You understand what I mean? So switching is really about one step and then one step and then one step. Don't throw them straight into saying we want them to write, of those very difficult, complicated descriptions. No, start with simple vocab first, then ask them, how can you improve it? Is there one or two words you can switch out for a more difficult word? Also, I want to remind you that it's not about using all difficult words or all complex words, because as any cook or any chef would know, you cannot just keep adding salt, cannot just keep adding pepper, adding spices and expect the food to taste better. Some words should be simpler, some words should be more complex. If you're using descriptions like a shiver of delight ran down her spine, all these words are short and simple. You don't want to say an ecstatic frisson of delight trickled from the top of her neck down to the base of her spine. No, that's just too much. You don't want to do that. But this is what a lot of kids are doing. They want to make it more difficult and more difficult by just layering and layering until it becomes just too complicated. All right, so it's really also about finding that balance of simple and difficult words. If you want to use slightly more difficult words, then you can keep your sentence structure simple, for example. Find the balance. Okay? Anything else, parents? I think that's anything else. Short stories. Actually, if you go online and search for books for 12-year-olds, short stories for 12-year-olds, there are lots of things you can find online. Short stories online. Let's see. Storyberries, I think there are stories online. Actually, a lot of the things that they read are short stories, simple books. Anything else I can help you with? Anything that I can enlighten you about? I think that I'll take one last question if there's any. If not, I've got to end here because I've got another lesson coming up soon. Anything? No? Oh, great. Thank you. You're welcome. It's nice to see parents' faces and to talk to parents. Sometimes I think some of the things that I tell the kids just goes past them and they're like so stressed out. So it's good to also tell parents so that you know what's going on in your kids' brains. I know that PSLE can be very stressful. As an ex-teacher, I do have a very deep-seated belief in the education system that it's been very well thought out and very, how to say, it's been a very detailed process of refining the education system over the years. I do think that it's not that stressful if parents and teachers don't stress the kids out too much. So like I said, it's really about getting them to pace themselves. Don't go crazy right now with the assessment books and the exam papers. Make sure that they get their basics right before we move on to later on in the year. So I always do find that by June, August, the kids look like they're falling apart and they look so stressed and they're so tired. So we don't want them to burn out too early. Okay, I hope that I have been helpful. If you have any other questions, you can always go back to the email address, which I think was english@cher.com. So if you have anything, you can always email me there and I'll try to address. Okay, this email address. Your kids can also email us and we will try to address any questions, especially if it has to do with the lesson that they have just attended or anything you want to clarify. They can always ask and I can clarify the lesson for them with all the other kids. Okay? All right. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope that has been fruitful for you. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you.